You're just a burden. Mark's words hit Ruth like a slap, louder than the hollow toast on her plate. Her son, sitting across from her, hadn't even bothered to soften the cruelty. Emily, his wife, didn't even glance up from her phone. Ruth's heart squeezed, not with hurt, but with clarity. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. His words landed heavier than the cold toast on her plate. You're just a burden. The toast cracked under her knife, dry and stiff like cardboard. Ruth didn't even taste it, just stared at the plate as though it might offer a way out. Across the table, Mark sipped his coffee and smirked, as if he hadn't just let that sentence crawl out of his mouth like a roach. You're just a burden. No one corrected him. No one said a word. Emily, seated just beside him in her crisp blouse and filtered smile, didn't even glance up from her phone. Her nails clicked softly across the screen, perfectly polished, perfectly indifferent. Ruth blinked. Once. Twice. Her breath caught. Not from hurt. Not yet. It was the clarity. The stunning clarity of realization. They don't even bother pretending anymore. Mark chuckled, brushing off his cruelty with the ease of someone who'd said far worse behind closed doors. I'm joking, he said, but there was no apology in it. Emily hummed, barely acknowledging the moment. Don't start, Ruth. You always take things so personally. Ruth looked down again. The yolk on her plate had broken. It bled slowly into the toast, turning the crust to yellow mush. Something in her chest squeezed. They wanted her to feel crazy. That was the trick, wasn't it? Dismiss her, wear her down, and then call it sensitivity when she flinched. But this was no misunderstanding. This was war. Ruth rose slowly, thud. A chair scraped across the tile with a shrill animal squeal. Her knees ached as always, but today she didn't feel it. She walked to the sink, pulled open the drawer. There it was. The envelope sat still as death among rubber bands and expired coupons. Its thick edge peeked out like a threat. Notice of termination of tenancy. Official words for an unofficial betrayal. She hadn't told them she found it in the mail. They must have assumed she'd be too dim to check the post, or maybe they hoped she'd just fade quietly. But Ruth Marlene DeWitt hadn't faded for anyone in 74 years. Not when Frank died. Not when the chemo took her hair, and she wouldn't now, not in her son's spare room, not in her daughter-in-law's carefully curated hell. In the kitchen silence, she heard something else, the low, distant hum of memory. Frank's laugh echoing through their first house in Dayton, the clatter of dishes from the kitchen where she once reigned, the scent of cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning. A home, a real one. Ruth pressed the drawer shut. Not today, she thought. You will not shrink me today. She moved with intention now, back to her room, slid into her navy skirt, buttoned the cream cardigan with care, ran a comb through silver hair. No lipstick. She wanted to look serious. She didn't bother telling Mark or Emily where she was going. What would they care? She didn't even pause when she passed their half-closed bedroom door. The community center was 3 blocks down, and there was a meeting this morning, something about city permits and senior housing. She usually ignored those flyers. Not today. Today, she would be seen, heard, counted. As she stepped outside, the sun surprised her. It was bold, hot for morning. She narrowed her eyes against it, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. Halfway across the street, her purse buzzed. Once. Sharp. Insistent. She didn't stop. She didn't reach for it. Not yet. Not until she knew exactly what to do next. As she crossed the street, the phone in her purse buzzed once. Sharp, insistent. She didn't reach for it. Not yet. Not until she knew exactly what to do next. As they cozied on the couch, I dialed my lawyer. The park bench wasn't comfortable, but at least it was hers for the moment. No whispered judgments, no cold glances sliding across the room like knives. Just the ache of wooden slats against her back and the steady thrum of July cicadas in the trees overhead. Ruth's hands were stiff around her phone, not from age, from the weight of what she was about to do. She checked the time. Sarah always said she started early. With a deep breath, Ruth pressed the contact. It rang twice. "Sarah Langston." Ruth exhaled. "It's me, Ruth DeWitt." A pause, then warmth. "Ruth, I was just thinking about you. How are you?" She closed her eyes. "Not great." She heard her own voice and hated how small it sounded, but she didn't take it back. She told Sarah everything. The comment at breakfast, the silence that followed, the way Emily's eyes slid right past her like she wasn't sitting at that table at all, the tension in the walls, thick enough to chew. "I don't feel safe there anymore," Ruth said finally, "not in the emotional sense. And I think they know it. They want me to leave, Sarah. Quietly. With shame." Sarah was silent on the other end, absorbing it the way only a good lawyer or an old friend could. "You still have the condo deed?" Sarah asked, her voice calm. "In the safety box, still in my name, still legally mine." "Good, Sarah said. "That's leverage." Ruth looked down at her hands. The polish was chipped. She hadn't noticed until now. "I need to ask something else," she said. "Something harder." "I'm listening." Her thumb trembled over the edge of the phone. "If I were to I see them, my son, his wife, legally. Can I?" Sarah didn't flinch. "If they're not on the deed, and they're not paying rent, and you can show cause, yes. It's your home, Ruth. You have every right to reclaim it." There was a beat of silence between them, long and heavy. Then Ruth let out a laugh, low and strange, like something from her gut she hadn't known was hiding there. "Imagine that, me evicting Mark." Another silence. Sarah broke it gently. "You wouldn't be the first mother who had to choose peace over politeness." A sharp buzz broke the moment. Ruth glanced down at her phone. A text from Emily. One line. "We're heading to the theater now. Won't be back till late." That kiss emoji felt like acid on her tongue. She stared at it a moment longer, then locked the screen. A pair of teenagers skateboarded past the bench, laughing. Their joy had nothing to do with her, but she inhaled it anyway, like secondhand courage. Her eyes drifted across the park. A father knelt to tie his daughter's shoe. A man in a white cap tossed breadcrumbs to the birds. Life moved on, quietly, freely, without the need for apology. Frank would have never let this happen. That thought landed sharp in her chest. Frank, who built that condo with his own sweat, who insisted Ruth's name go first on the paperwork. "In case anything ever happens to me," he'd said, pride in his voice, love in his eyes. "And now they want to kick me out of the very place he died to protect? No." That was the moment it clicked. Not as rage, not even as revenge, but as clarity. Cold, focused. She would not fight them with tears or pleading. She would fight them the way the world taught women like her to survive, with silence. And paperwork. "Draw them up," she said quietly into the phone. "The eviction papers, I want them ready by Monday." Sarah paused. "You sure, Ruth? They'll fight back hard." Sarah paused. "You sure, Ruth? They'll fight back hard." He answered with a sneer, then shut the door, loudly. Ruth stood in the hallway, manila envelope in one hand, the other braced against the wall for balance she didn't need but took anyway. Her heart was a quiet riot in her chest. Every breath felt like standing at the edge of a diving board. This was the jump. She raised her hand and knocked once. The door creaked open a few seconds later. Mark stood in the frame, shirt untucked, irritation already curdling in his face. Behind him, the TV glowed with a late-afternoon game show rerun, canned laughter seeping out into the hallway. Ruth held out the envelope. He didn't take it. "What's this?" Her voice was even. "Read it." Mark snatched it from her hand with a dramatic sigh, tore the flap open like it had personally offended him. His eyes darted across the first few lines. He blinked, then scoffed. "You've got to be kidding me." His laugh wasn't real. It was something brittle, sharp-edged and unfamiliar, like he'd practiced it, like he didn't know how else to respond. "You're evicting us?" he said, shaking the papers in disbelief. From the couch, Emily turned her head. Her expression was strange, part confusion, part curiosity, and something else beneath it. Something Ruth couldn't name yet. Not fear, but close. Mark crumpled the paper in his fist, then let it unfurl again, creased and disrespected. "This a joke, Mom?" Ruth didn't blink. "No." For a moment, he stared at her like he didn't recognize her. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he only saw the version of her he'd crafted in his mind. Frail, forgetful, grateful to have a roof over her head. But the silence between them said it. Plainly, that version of Ruth was gone. Mark looked back at the paper. "You've lost it." Behind him, Emily rose slowly from the couch, walking forward. She took the paper from Mark's hand and read it herself, brows rising as she moved through the lines. "Wait," she said softly. "This is real?" Mark let out a sharp breath and turned on his heel. "I'm not dealing with this crap." The door slammed behind him, the sound ricocheting through the condo like a gunshot. Emily lingered. Her eyes met Ruth's. There was no apology in them, just calculation, like someone redoing the math after discovering a number had changed without permission. Then she walked away too. Ruth exhaled and stepped back into her room. Her legs trembled, but not from weakness. It was the adrenaline, the price of taking back ground she'd once surrendered. She sat on the edge of her bed, letting the stillness settle over her. This was her home. They'd never paid rent, not once. She hadn't asked, hadn't wanted to. It had been enough just to keep the house full after Frank passed, to not eat dinner alone every night, to not feel the echo of a quiet that never ended. But that silence had become something else, heavier, lonelier, and crueler than solitude ever could be. A shaft of late light split through the curtains, illuminating a photo on the nightstand, Frank in the recliner, a book in his lap, blanket tucked up around him. He'd been so sick then, but he still smiled for her. Always. She remembered the nights they didn't sleep, when his cough wouldn't let them, when the silence was pierced not by cruelty, but by care. She remembered the way he whispered her name like a prayer, the last thing on his lips before pain took his breath. He would have hated this, what his home had become. Her phone buzzed once on the comforter beside her. She picked it up. Eviction hearing scheduled 8:45 a.m. Tuesday. She stared at the words, then set the phone down beside her. Tuesday. That meant she'd missed the support group meeting Monday night, the one she always went to, the only space where no one looked through her. But that, too, was a cost she'd already weighed. She rose again, straightened her blouse. The hallway outside was quiet now, tense, like a chessboard just before the first move. Either knock and knock, not at her door. The front door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. She froze, spine stiffening as she turned toward the sound. A knock at the door. Slow, deliberate. Not Mark, not Emily. Someone else. It was the neighbor. I thought they hated me. Ruth opened the front door slowly, still bracing for a fight. But instead of Mark or Emily or some courier with more bad news, it was her. Sarah Bishop, Unit 2B, the woman with the endless cardigans and too loud chihuahua. The one who hadn't made eye contact in months. She stood there holding 2 paper cups from the cafe across the street, her short gray bob curling slightly at the ends from the humidity. Her lips pressed into something like a smile, nervous, but real. "I figured you could use caffeine more than I could today." Ruth blinked. "You came here?" Sarah held out the coffee. "I know we haven't exactly been neighborly, but I heard things, and I saw him storm out." Ruth hesitated, then stepped aside. The door clicked shut behind them. They sat at the small dining table, Ruth's old one from the condo, the one Mark had always called junk. It had survived 3 moves, 4 Thanksgivings, 1 wedding reception. Ruth wrapped her hands around the coffee cup and tried to ignore how much they still trembled. Sarah cleared her throat. "I should have said something sooner. I just didn't want to get involved. But your son, Mark, he came to me last week, told me you were slipping. Said I should keep an eye on you." Ruth's grip tightened. "Said if I noticed anything, like signs of decline, I should tell him. That he was building a case against you." There it was. The slow slide of betrayal, now confirmed by a neighbor who'd once ignored her in the mailroom. But I didn't tell him anything, Sarah continued quickly, because I didn't see anything. You've been nothing but sharp as a tack. Quiet, yes. But who wouldn't be with the way they speak to you? Ruth's throat tightened. And now? Sarah reached into her purse, pulled out a small notepad. Now I'm willing to put that in writing. If this goes to court, you shouldn't stand alone. For a moment, Ruth couldn't speak. The tears threatened, warm and foolish, but she swallowed them down. This wasn't the time. Thank you, she whispered. You don't know what this means. Sarah shrugged, but her eyes glistened. I think I do. The silence that followed was softer than usual, companionable, even. Then footsteps, fast, angry. The front door flew open before either of them could rise. Emily stood there, keys still swinging from her fingers. Her face, pink with fury, twitched as her eyes fell on the scene. Oh, how cozy, she spat. What is this, a recruitment drive? Sarah just brought coffee, Ruth said calmly. Emily's laugh was venom. Of course she did. You're poisoning him, you know that? Ruth stood slowly, keeping her hands on the table to steady herself. Or maybe I'm protecting him. Emily's jaw clenched. For a moment, it looked like she might slap the mug right out of Ruth's hand. Instead, she looked at Sarah, sneered, and turned back to Ruth. You've made your point. But don't pretend this is some noble act. This is control. This is guilt. He's broken because of you. Ruth didn't flinch. He was broken long before I stepped in. Emily stood there another moment, eyes narrowing like she was memorizing the wallpaper for the police report. Then she turned and walked out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glass. Ruth let out a long breath, her knuckles still white. Sarah sat back down, expression unreadable. She's intense. Ruth chuckled once, dry, humorless. She always is when the mask slips. A long pause. Then the silence hummed again. It was broken by a sharp buzz from Ruth's phone. She glanced down. One notification. Press inquiry. Local news requests comment on senior eviction case. Her stomach turned. Ruth's eyes fixed on the screen. The press was watching. And now, so was everyone else. Lights, recorders, suddenly I'm the story. The knock came again, this time lighter but not hesitant, like someone used to being let in. Ruth opened the door to a young woman with a press badge swinging from her lanyard and a cameraman already angling his tripod on the walkway. Mrs. DeWitt? The reporter asked, bright-eyed and breathless. I'm Cassidy from Channel 6. We'd love a quick word, if you're willing. Sarah, still sitting inside, stood instinctively. Ruth, you don't have to... It's fine, Ruth said, her voice calm but steel-edged. Give me a moment. She stepped out, letting the door close softly behind her. The sun hit her directly now, warm on her cardigan, sharp across her cheeks. She looked smaller than the headlines would suggest, but she stood taller than anyone expected. Cassidy clicked on the recorder. Can you tell us what led to this moment? What made you take legal action against your own son? Ruth held her gaze. I'm not here to shame him. This isn't about bitterness or revenge. It's about respect, about remembering whose name is still on the doorframe. The camera rolled in silence. Even the cicadas seemed to hush. I spent my life given. She continued, but when giving turns into erasing, when you have to apologize for existing in your own home, then it's time to stop. Cassidy blinked. You're incredibly poised. Most people would be furious. Oh, I'm furious, Ruth said. I'm just done wasting it. The cameraman lowered the lens, quietly awed. They were just about to wrap when the screen door behind Ruth banged open. Mark. He stormed down the steps, dragging both kids behind him. Lila and Max, each gripping a tablet and looking dazed. Emily trailed just behind, whispering something sharp, likely desperate. But Mark wasn't listening. You want to broadcast our dirty laundry? He barked at the crew. Fine. Let them see the woman who'd throw her family out. Cassidy stepped back, cautious but recording. Ruth turned. Mark, this is not the time. No, he snapped, his voice cracking. "You don't get to play the saint now. You don't get to smile for cameras while destroying everything." Emily tugged at his sleeve, her voice low. "Mark, the kids." But he wasn't stopping. "She's lying to you. She's confused. She's sick. You don't know what she's like behind closed doors." Cassidy raised a brow. "We're live." The words hit like a slap. Emily paled. Mark froze. Even the kids looked up now, wide-eyed. Ruth felt her stomach churn. Not from fear, from heartbreak. Because somewhere deep inside, she'd still hoped the boy she raised wouldn't humiliate himself on a sidewalk. Sarah cracked the door and peeked out. "Everything okay?" Ruth turned slightly. "Everything's fine. They're just leaving." Mark stared at her, mouth open, words failing. He looked smaller now, not younger, just reduced. A man out of moves. He turned back to Emily. "We need to fix this." Cassidy lowered her mic. "Thank you, Mrs. DeWitt. You've been gracious and brave." Ruth offered a small nod. "Just tell it right." In the time the crew was gone, the street was already buzzing. A woman walking her dog slowed to snap a photo. A man in a truck honked and gave a thumbs up as he passed. Sarah scrolled her phone. Eyebrows, lead. The courthouse smelled faintly of lemon polish and nerves. Ruth walked through the wide security doors in her navy blazer, the one with the softened shoulders and the faint threadbare edge at the cuffs. Her shoes clicked gently against the floor, every step a quiet declaration. She didn't look back. Not when Sarah fell into step beside her, not when the whispers rose behind them, not even when Mark's voice caught in her periphery. The courtroom itself was smaller than she'd imagined, more modest. No gallery packed with reporters, just a scattering of benches, polished wood, and a judge who looked like he hadn't smiled in years. Ruth took her seat with both hands folded in her lap. Across the aisle, Mark sat beside a thick-jawed man in a gray suit, his lawyer. Emily was there too, her makeup lighter than usual, hair tied back, jaw clenched. The kids were not. Thank God. The judge entered, robe rustling. Case 7B, DeWitt v. DeWitt. Petition for residential eviction. The words sounded so sterile, like a broken family could be filed alphabetically. Mark's lawyer stood first. He was slick, confident in the way people get when they assume they're about to win. He launched into a calm but brutal character sketch, painting Ruth as an aging woman confused by grief, manipulated by paranoia. She's seeking to remove her own family without just cause, he said, a move driven not by legal merit, but emotional instability. Ruth didn't move. She watched the man speak, watched Mark nod beside him, watched Emily stare at the table like the grain in the wood might save her. Then Sarah was called. She stood straighter than Ruth had seen before. She didn't embellish, didn't overreach, just gave the facts. What she'd seen, what Mark had said, what she hadn't seen. No signs of memory loss, no decline, no erratic behavior, just quiet endurance. Then Ruth's name was called. She rose slowly, walked to the front, placed one hand on the wooden divider, the other at her side. "I didn't want to be here," she began. Her voice didn't waver, but it didn't shout either. "I didn't plan to spend the last act of my life explaining myself to strangers, but here we are." She paused, eyes sweeping briefly over the room. Mark refused to meet her gaze. Emily did, and then looked away. "This is not about resentment. I opened my home out of love. I asked for nothing. No rent, no promises, just peace. What I received was silence and control." She drew a breath. "There's a line between giving and disappearing. I don't want revenge. I want boundaries. I want my home to feel like mine again." No one spoke when she finished. The judge wrote something down. Even the bailiff looked unusually still. Emily dabbed at her eye with a tissue. Ruth didn't know if the tears were for the courtroom or the camera. She didn't care. The judge cleared his throat. "This court will recess and issue a ruling by noon tomorrow." A gavel, a shuffle. Everyone began to rise. Outside the courtroom, the air felt thinner. like something essential had been used up in there. Ruth walked with Sarah toward the building's exit, their steps echoing in tandem. Behind her, the voices were softer. Mark and Emily speaking in low tones, then a pause, and then, "Mom." She turned. Mark stood there, arms at his sides. His tie was askew, his mouth opened, closed again. "What now?" His voice cracked on the second word. For the first time in weeks, he looked like someone's son. Mark's voice cracked as he asked, "What now?" And Ruth, heart pounding, had no ready answer. He said he'd hate me forever, then offered coffee. The cafe was nearly empty. Just the soft clink of silverware and the low hum of an ancient espresso machine behind the counter. Ruth sat at a corner table by the window, both hands around a chipped Sarah's. McMug, black coffee, no sugar. Across from her, Mark stared at his untouched cup like it might blink first. Neither of them had spoken in 10 minutes. "I said some awful things," he muttered finally. His voice was quiet, rough. "I meant some of them, not all." Ruth didn't flinch. "I know the difference." He looked up, surprised. Outside, a breeze stirred the trees. A pair of teenagers leaned against the bus stop across the street, laughing, oblivious to the grief held in this tiny room. "I was scared," he admitted. "Not of you, of losing everything. We're behind on everything, the mortgage, the car. Emily maxed out one of the cards trying to keep things together, and He stopped, rubbed his jaw. "I didn't know how to ask for help. So I started convincing myself you were in the way, that you owed us something." Ruth nodded slowly, not forgiving, not accusing, just hearing him. Across the room, Emily sat at a separate table, far enough not to be in the conversation, close enough to hear every word. Her face was unreadable, chin high but eyes soft. Ruth saw something flicker behind the carefully sculpted cheekbones, not guilt, not regret, something closer to exhaustion. The look of someone who knew the house of cards was already collapsing. Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I wrote this yesterday, meant to read it in court. Couldn't." He slid it across the table. Ruth didn't open it, just pressed her palm gently over it like it was something fragile, like maybe this moment was. "Let's not go back," she said. "Let's start real. From here." Mark's shoulders sank, and for the first time in weeks, the fight seemed to leave his body. He nodded. "I hated you for a while," he whispered, "convinced myself I had to." Ruth gave a soft, humorless chuckle. "I hated you too." He looked up again, and for the briefest second they almost smiled. Almost, but Ruth's chest still ached. The betrayal hadn't left. It had simply stepped back, observing, watching. The coffee was cold now, but she didn't move to refill it. Mark looked at the clock. "We should head back. Court ruling will be in soon." Emily rose without a word and moved to join them, her purse clutched tightly, her lips pressed thin. As they all stepped out into the overcast light, something passed between them, a fragile, invisible thread. Not trust, not yet, but something trying to become it. They didn't hug. There were no "I love yous," no sudden cinematic reconciliation, just silence, and for once, it didn't feel cruel. Mark opened the car door for Emily, then paused. "Thanks for meeting me." Ruth nodded. "Thanks for asking." He hesitated like there was more. But then he got in and drove off, taillights disappearing into the late morning mist. Ruth watched until the street was empty. Her phone buzzed in her purse. "Sarah, check your mailbox." ASAP, Ruth stared at the screen. Her breath caught. Ruth turned toward the mailbox, pulse quickening, because if Sarah was right, nothing about this was over. Enclosed, Dad's letter, and a vault key. The mailbox creaked when she pulled it open. The day's offerings were mostly junk, pre-approved credit cards, discount coupons for things she didn't need. But tucked between them, wrapped in a weathered cream envelope, was something different. Thick, heavy, familiar. Her name was written on the front in her father's handwriting, spidery but unmistakable. Ruth Marlene DeWitt, private, open alone. She stood there for a long moment staring, then tucked the envelope inside her purse and walked quickly back up the steps. The house was empty, thank God. She moved to the kitchen table, brushed away the stack of unpaid bills, and sat. Hands trembling now, she opened the envelope. Inside, 2 items. A folded letter and a small brass key, old, warm with time, its teeth worn smooth. Ruth unfolded the paper slowly. The ink had faded a little, but the voice, his voice, rose off the page clear as a bell. Ruth, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you're holding that key, then I know you're facing something heavy. You always carried the hard stuff quietly, just like your mother. Her throat tightened. I've made arrangements. I've left a deposit box at Lincoln Federal, box 614. The key is yours. There's enough in there to help if the help isn't coming from where it should. I trust your judgment, kid. I always have. Use it when you need strength. Not money, strength. There's a difference. You'll know the moment. The words bled and blurred as tears welled in her eyes. He knew. Somehow, all those years ago, he knew. She pressed the letter to her chest, shaking now, not from grief, not entirely, but from the collision of what was and what remained. A father's unwavering faith, a mother's grit, her own quiet fire that had nearly burned out until now. Her eyes drifted to the key again, catching the afternoon sun through the window. She wiped her eyes, once, twice, then folded the letter, kissed it gently, and set it aside. She would go to the bank, not for the money, not yet, for the message, for the part of her still tethered to someone who saw her before anyone tried to rewrite her worth. The phone buzzed on the table. She hesitated, then picked it up. Mark, she answered. His voice was tight, panicked. Mom, something's happening at work. Ruth sat straighter. What is it? I don't know, he said, breath quick. They're combing through my expense reports. HR's pulling old files. I got a warning, but they're being cagey, like they know something. Silence filled the line. Then, they're watching us, Mom. Ruth held the phone to her ear, heart pounding, not just for her son, but for what might be coming next. He needed me, after so. I told you this would come back around, she said softly, more to herself than anyone. Mark looked over. Yeah, you did. Emily glanced at Ruth. Her posture wasn't exactly apologetic, but her expression had changed, like someone exhaling after holding a breath for too long. I'll finish folding these in the kids' room, she said gently. You two talk. And then she was gone. Mark turned back to the phone. Can we... His voice caught. Can we try again? Ruth didn't answer with words. She just nodded, slow and deliberate, knowing he couldn't see it, but hoping he could feel it. That would have been enough. But then Sarah knocked on the back door. I've got something, she said, holding up her phone like a trophy. The community newsletter wants to run a spotlight on the senior center's volunteer work. They want to talk to you, Ruth. Feature what you've done with the group. Ruth blinked. Me? Sarah nodded. They said you're the face of resilience right now. We could use it to talk about caregiving, reinvention, the right kind of visibility. Ruth hesitated. The last time the press got involved, Mark's name got dragged with hers. She hadn't regretted speaking truth, but the cost had been steep. I don't know, she said. I'm not looking to be a symbol. Sarah shrugged. Then be a shield. Tell it from your angle. Set the record straight before someone else writes it for you. Ruth turned that over in her mind. Slowly, painfully, she realized it wasn't about spotlight. It was about protection. If the narrative was out there, better it come from her mouth than their mistake. She picked up her phone again, thumb hovering over her messages. Mark's voice echoed in her memory. You stood up for yourself, and it freed me too. Maybe the fight wasn't just hers anymore. Her phone buzzed again. Cassidy, Channel 6. We'd love you back on the air. Studios cleared for Tom. Ruth inhaled, slow and steady. Her hands remained in her lap, one palm folded gently over the other. Not clenched, not shaking. Cassidy turned to her. Mrs. DeWitt, you've been called brave, controversial, even a hero. But who do you think you are in this story? Ruth met her eyes, then looked straight into the camera. I'm a mother, she said quietly, and I'm someone who forgot for a long time that mothers aren't meant to disappear. Cassidy tilted her head. Was the eviction about revenge? No, Ruth said. It was about love. She let that settle before continuing. Real love. When it's grown up and tired and still holding on, sometimes it doesn't sound sweet. Sometimes it's not gentle. Sometimes it draws a line. Cassidy blinked, just once, like she hadn't expected poetry. Ruth kept going. I didn't evict my son to punish him. I did it to wake us both up. He was drowning, and so was I. We were both pretending our silence was survival, but it was just slow suffocation. She glanced off camera, just once. Mark was watching. She could feel it. In the control room, he leaned forward in his chair, his fingers tangled in front of his lips. Emily stood beside him, their daughter balanced on her hip. The little girl tilted her head, eyes wide on the screen. "She didn't disappear, did she?" the child asked. "No," Emily whispered. "She didn't." Cassidy's voice softened. "What would you say to families who are in a similar place?" Ruth's throat tightened, but she smiled. "Don't wait until the only thing left to give each other is your silence. Boundaries aren't betrayal. And sometimes, standing up for yourself is the most generous thing you can do for someone else." The studio held its breath. When the segment ended, the room broke into quiet applause. Nothing raucous, just that warm, reverent sound of people recognizing something true. Cassidy took her hand off camera. "I run an initiative," she said, settling into the armchair. "We support caregivers, grandparents raising grandkids, elder women lost in their own homes, mothers doing the work of 5 people on the budget of 1. What you said? It cut through the noise. Ruth sipped quietly. Let the silence stretch before asking. "And? I want you," Grace said simply. "Your voice, your grit, your story." She leaned forward. "Help me build something stronger. You'd be co-director, paid, platformed, no pity, just purpose." Ruth's breath caught. It sounded like too much, too good, too sudden. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of spotlight," she said slowly. Grace smiled. "You don't need to shine. Just aim the light." Ruth glanced toward the window. Beyond the hedges, a child chased a dog through a rose-lined path. Laughter, joy untouched by caution. She imagined what it might mean, to spend her days helping women like herself find ground under their feet again. A beat passed. Then another. Ruth looked down at the cup in her hand. "My family. We've just found each other again. We're still healing. This could complicate things." Grace nodded, unfazed. "Healing never needs a quiet room, just honesty and movement." As if on cue, Ruth's phone buzzed. "Mark, just saw the clip again. I'm proud of you, and I'm okay if the world sees it too." She blinked, stunned, then smiled. Small, earned. Another buzz. "Emily, if you do this, let's do it together. I could help. I want to." Ruth laughed softly, pressing the screen to her heart. "Something funny?" Grace asked. "No," Ruth said. "Something new." They sat in companionable silence for a moment until Grace reached for a velvet folder on the table between them. "There's one more thing," she said, sliding it toward Ruth. "This is off script and not part of the formal proposal." Ruth opened it. "A deed, pre-approved transfer form, Unit 2B, Sarah B." Ruth sat up straighter. "Just reviewing some complicated kindness." Emily stepped in. Her hair was still damp from a shower, and her voice held that odd blend of vulnerability and resolve Ruth had only just begun to appreciate. "I know it's none of my business," Emily said, "but Mark told me about the offer, the foundation, the everything." Ruth watched her carefully. "I think it's incredible," Emily added, "but I also see the toll it's taking. You look like you're trying to lift something that belongs to 10 people. I'm just tired," Ruth admitted. "Not weak, just tired." Emily gave her a small nod. "You don't have to carry us anymore. Not like that." There was no sarcasm in her voice, no calculation, just honesty. Ruth hadn't realized how much she missed that. After Emily left, Ruth turned back to the desk and found Sarah's note tucked between the pages of a community newsletter. "Whatever you decide, you've already changed lives, including mine." Ruth pressed her fingertips to the ink. The simplicity of it broke something open in her chest. Her eyes drifted to the windowsill. There, nestled behind a photo of her and Frank at Coney Island, was the letter from her father. She reached for it, ran her fingers over the fold, reread a line she hadn't needed to memorize, but had anyway. "Use it when you need strength, not money, strength." She imagined him now, stubborn, principled, his hands always calloused, his eyes soft only when no one was looking. He would have seen right through the fine print, would have known that a gift with strings wasn't a gift at all, and that love, real love, doesn't come with non-disclosure agreements. Ruth breathed deeply, her lungs aching with the weight of clarity. She didn't want to burn the bridge Grace had built, but she wouldn't cross it blindfolded either. The money could help, the partnership could help, but not at the count. Grace leaned back. "Why fight this hard for people who nearly broke you?" Ruth smiled, soft, unshaken. "Because they didn't," she said. "And because it's not just about them, it's about me, about not turning survival into performance. I won't sign myself into silence ever again." The words hung in the room like a bell's final note. Grace reached for the red pen on her desk. She clicked it open and began striking through the clauses herself. When she finished, she capped the pen, slid the contract forward, and held out her hand. "Then let's build this the right way." Ruth shook it. Her fingers were steady. Grace stood and moved to a small cabinet near the bookshelf. From it, she pulled out 2 short glasses and a bottle of something amber and warm-looking. "I don't usually drink this early," she said, pouring. "But for clean slates?" Ruth chuckled. "Just a splash." They raised their glasses. "To truth," Grace said. "To boundaries," Ruth added. They clinked. The glass was cold. The warmth followed after. Ruth signed. Her name looped across the page like it had weight now. Meaning. When she set the pen down, she felt something shift in her spine. A lightness not from relief, but from resolve. She hadn't backed away. She hadn't folded. She'd held the line and been heard. As she gathered her things, Grace was already turning toward her laptop, tapping in notes for the team. "I'll have the final version delivered this evening," she said. "Program launches next week. You'll need a prep packet." Ruth paused at the door, turned back. "Grace?" The woman looked up. "I meant what I said. No spotlight. Just aim the light." Grace gave her a look, half respect, half amusement. "Understood." Ruth stepped out into the hallway, the contract warm in her bag, her chest a strange blend of calm and anticipation. In the elevator, she exhaled, then smiled. By the tea. "We started this with a courtroom and a question," she began. "What does dignity look like when everything familiar starts to unravel?" Silence. Listening. It looks like a mother reclaiming her name on a lease. It looks like a daughter-in-law showing up with coffee instead of judgment. It looks like a neighbor choosing truth over comfort. She scanned the room. Sarah, arms crossed proudly. Emily, laughing with a volunteer. Mark, standing beside her still. It looks like today. Applause broke gently, then grew. Not roaring, but steady, earnest. The kind of applause people offer when they've been waiting for something they didn't know they needed. When Ruth stepped down, a woman with a cane stopped her mid-aisle. "I thought I was invisible," the woman whispered, gripping Ruth's wrist. "Thank you for proving I'm not." Ruth nodded, too full to speak. The rest of the afternoon blurred. There were photos, interviews, Sarah guiding a circle of teen volunteers through the outreach map taped up by the snacks table. Emily helping women navigate registration kiosks, somehow turning tech glitches into laughter. Ruth noticed one thing over and over. They weren't just coming for support. They were coming for each other. By the time the last form was filed and the lights began to dim, Ruth leaned against the podium with a paper cup of lemonade and a mind too tired to hold joy all at once. Cassidy from Channel 6 approached quietly. "You still good for next month's segment? Community Transformation Spotlight?" Ruth blinked, then nodded. "I think so." Cassidy smiled. "Let us know what story you want to tell." Mark joined her just then, no rush in his step. He took the cup gently from her hand and set it down on the podium behind her. "Big day," he said. She nodded, silent. He looked around the room, now half empty, buzzing with the last gasps of effort. "I didn't think, back when it all..." The 4 of them stood around the counter, not toasts and speeches grand, just clinking porcelain like it was fine crystal. "To what?" Mark asked, lifting his cup. Sarah grinned. "To Ruth. To this thing we made." "To showing up," Emily added. Ruth raised hers last. "To starting late and still arriving." They sipped, laughed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't perfect, but it was whole. Later, when the sun dipped low and the air turned blue around the edges, Ruth stepped outside. Sarah followed, a folded newsletter in hand. "You're on page 3, she said, handing it over. "They called you the spark of the season." Ruth chuckled. "Is that a compliment or a fire hazard?" "They used the word transformative," Sarah said, "so I think it's both." The 2 women sat on the porch steps, the bottle between them, the mugs refilled with whatever was left. Ruth glanced at the headline again. "Elder Justice finds its voice." "I never meant for this," she whispered. "But you never ran from it either," Sarah replied. The dusk deepened. Porch lights flicked on one by one down the street. A soft breeze lifted the hem of Ruth's cardigan and brushed past her face like a familiar kiss. She thought of Frank, how he used to call this hour the golden hush, of her father, how he taught her that strength didn't always need to shout, of her mother, who never let a door close without asking what might be waiting on the other side. She thought of the eviction notice in that drawer, the first one, the one she never threw away, not out of spite, out of memory, out of reminder. It wasn't what ended her. It was what introduced her to herself. She looked out at the horizon, where the last sliver of sun was pulling away, not fading, but passing the light forward. Mark stepped out, rubbing his arms against the chill. "We're heading out in a few," he said. "Can I walk you home?" Ruth smiled. "I live right here now, remember?" He chuckled. "Right. Old habits." He kissed the top of her head, light, reverent. "You're not a burden," he murmured. "You're the bond." And then he was gone. Sarah rose too, giving Ruth a final squeeze. "See you tomorrow?" "Wouldn't miss it." And then it was just her. Ruth sat alone, not lonely, the newsletter in one hand, the champagne flute still warm in the other. The stars blinked on, shy and steady. She looked out toward the darkening sky and smiled. Fade out on Ruth smiling at the horizon, no longer waiting for the dawn. She'd become it, X.